So we have reached out to SSI or Geospatial Australia members, and anyone who is a member will receive 2 CPD points for attending today and every other forum that we run, except for the showcase, which is 3. And Surveyors Registration Board is 2 other FPET points, but it's more than that, George. There's also 3 development planning points FPET as well. So if you're a surveyor and you, pardon? Yeah, if you're a surveyor, you need some FPET points, let us know and we'll send you a certificate of attendance or whatever it is that you need to show that you are here. Feel free to keep your cameras on. We prefer to see your face, and we like you to participate in the conversation whenever you want. But otherwise, if you could mute yourself, that'd be great. But just if you have a question, feel free to either put it into the chat or unmute yourself and ask your question. So we encourage feedback along the way. If you're dialing in and you get a call and your phone will and you put us on hold, we'll play music. So the better way to answer that is just to hang up and then dial back in when you've finished your call. So we will run a couple of polls throughout the presentations to ask your opinion if George is thinking of something. And David, do you have a question? No. And then live polling. So yeah, that's all from me, I think. George, is there another slide after that, or is that it?
Yep. Just to recap what's in this session.
Yeah. So what George is going to cover, what we're all going to cover is the what's so right now, so clarifications and interpretations around the specs. We're going to share our community experiences, and that is with Anthony and Gaby. And then Gaby will do some training and tech tips to help make your life better. And George will wrap up and sort of talk about what's next and where to now in terms of B-Spec. So with that, I would like to hand you over to George and he will commence his presentation.
Thanks, Kelly. I thought I would start with a little bit of nostalgia. So this is circa 2012, 2013. So in fact, B-Spec is now 10 years old. Which I didn't sort of realise until I started looking through my notes about what I was going to present. But so this started off as we just whiteboarded it. We created a technical working group of the organisations that were interested, and at that point it was predominantly councils, because we wouldn't dare invite consultants to our meetings just in case they were going to put us on the spot. But oh, there's somebody. Could you just put that person on mute, please, Kelly? And you can see that we started fleshing out all of the different details that we wanted, and to this day, this is still how B-Spec works. And here's an interesting mob. You know, we were all sitting there. It was at a time where we actually met face to face. Novel concept that we had sandwiches, we chewed the fat, and we brainstormed on a whiteboard. Haven't done that in a very long time. And at that point, I had a look at, so this is actually the first version. And what you're actually seeing is at the top here, we had a section about the particular asset type. Then we had a different section that talked about the file specifications, then a different section on data validation. So, you know, it's quite a bit different to what it is now because of the feedback that we got from the community over time. We've consolidated all of those elements into the one area to save people having to and fro from the inside the document. Interestingly enough, this will be spoken about today, but back in 2012, we came up with a naming convention, which at the time was thought to be quite radical. But we've come round to that again, particularly the level naming convention, and which I'll talk a bit about that. today. So if you have any questions along the way during what I'm presenting, just pop them in the chat. Both Kelly and Gaby are monitoring it, and will let me know. Now, just before I move on to the next part, so you know, there's a few people that I wanted to introduce you to. You've been hearing from Kelly and myself, and Kelly has been instrumental in emceeing our events for the last, so this is her fourth year. We've been going for 4 years, so this is her fourth year, and comes up with a lot of the ideas around how we communicate, even to the point of providing me with a template for our presentations, which I'm very grateful for. Gaby Van Wyk, one of our business partners, who's the principal of the Digital Hive partnership that we have, and you'll be hearing from Gaby later. We also, some of you may have also heard from Philip Nelson, who's working out of our office and has been updating the specs in the background. We also have our events team, which you probably would have been hearing from as well, from Natalie and Melissa and others. And also we have a big commitment to internships and giving people an opportunity for work experience. So one of our interns, Joey, is also here today listening to what these specs are about, and giving her an opportunity to expand her experience as an environmental engineer completing a master's, how it goes from a design environment to a recording environment. So I just wanted to make those acknowledgements. So 10 years on, 4th September 2023, we will be releasing the new specifications. So what does that actually mean? For people who have been with us for a while, you will know that we have 2 versions. For people who are new to our forums and new to the specifications, I'll just spend a little bit of time around what this means. So on the left, you'll see that we have B-Spec for existing assets. And then over here, B-Spec DDS version. So the distinction is that we found that when dealing with greenfield sites, the B-Spec DDS version is everything that we want to know about those assets. It's fine. There's nothing that we don't know about those assets, whether it's their location or particular characteristics, so that we don't have fields that are populated by unknown or not applicable. We have fields that are completely populated. That's the intention. Whereas when we're dealing with existing assets, what we're talking about is assets that are already existing, they're historical assets. And the difference between the two is that we know that when we go out on site, that we can generally record what we see. So the existing assets version is all about identifying which attributes are compulsory and which attributes we think are desirable and which attributes are optional. So that's probably the only time that you'll see those kind of classifications for attributes. In the DDS version, all attributes are mandatory. In the existing version, we've categorized every attribute out of a pragmatic approach. So that's the difference between the two. But essentially, if we have a building footprint with specific attributes, it's all the same attributes. It's just a matter of what can be practically captured. So there's a lot that's been going on in the background. In fact, the 4th of September will be 4 years since the last release. So the last release was in May 2019. So we've been doing quite a lot of work over the years to to determine what are we going to do. So typically we'll have a minor release and a major release based on the kind of conversations that we're having with our user community during the year. Now, as it's turned out, B-Spec being our, even though it's 10 years old, it's still our youngest specifications in terms of its take-up. And so what we're finding is the feedback that comes back to us is a bit slower than the other ones, which is fine. It just means that it gives the users an opportunity to bed down what they really want from B-Spec. And so we've and so it's taken us a little bit of time to update all the specs. But in terms of what we've been doing with all of the specs in general, we're updating the sample data, we're updating the spreadsheets, we're updating the code lists. All of that you can take as a given. But as well as that, there's a number of other national and international initiatives, such as VBIS, which stands for Virtual Buildings Information System, VDAS, Victorian Digital Asset Strategy, UniClass is an ISO standard, and then on top of that, there's other Australian standards. So we've looked at the inputs that we want to include in the specs from the users. So we actively encourage you to communicate with us if there is something that is ambiguous, doesn't make sense, you want to include that hasn't been included previously. So all of that gets taken into account. One of the things that Phil Nelson from our office has been doing, or that I've asked him to do, is to have a look at B-Spec versus VBIS versus UniClass. So, why are we doing this? In part, it's an element of future-proofing. It's also about, we've been asked by a number of organisations and individuals to have a look at these particular initiatives to see how A-SPEC aligns with them. So one of the things that I'm doing now is presenting our observations. So essentially what we're looking at is from the research that we've done. So if you look at the column VBIS, Virtual Buildings Information System, it's been established as a new standard in asset classification to adopt a consistent asset classification structure, which is fine. It's for buildings and for facilities management purposes. That's our observation. And it's been designed predominantly for commercial software providers. This initiative has been kicked off in Victoria, and has been funded by the Victorian government. And if you want to know more details about it, no problem. We'll be releasing this table to show people who want to align with VBIS and A-SPEC just what the differences are. And as you can see, there are some significant differences. So UniClass, as I mentioned, is an ISO certified and a globally recognised and consistent system. And it's been recommended by the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy. So essentially by the Victorian Government, Office of Projects Victoria. So again, this has been targeted at the larger projects, the larger infrastructure projects that are occurring in Victoria. So the consultants have been asked to adapt their systems, their CAD environments in Revit and others in their BIM to classify assets according to UniClass. So again, what we've looked at is how we can get A-SPEC data out of it. From our perspective, it doesn't make any difference what classification system you use. Our focus is how do we end up with A-SPEC data at the end of it? And Gaby will talk a little bit, I think Gaby will talk a little bit about that during his second presentation around Revit and creating schedules and the like. So again, what we're doing is, you can see that for a building space, it's covered under Uniclass, but not covered under VBIS, which supports our observation around it's not creating a spatial link. It deals with data in a 3D world, that's fine, but it doesn't deal with data in a GIS world if we want to export that data and map it into our GIS environments. So there's a specific role for A-SPEC in that it provides a level of granularity not offered by the other systems. As I mentioned, about the geospatial location, also the level of attribution. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to pop something in the chat, or even take yourself off mute and ask. Okay, so one of the things we've also done, I mentioned this building floor numbering guide, and this came out of a conversation that I actually had with Anthony, who's one of our presenters today, because they were looking at how they could streamline the adoption of the B-Spec data that they were receiving. And one of the ways to do that was to create some certainty about the naming conventions. So it's the same kind of principles that we followed with our code lists. He said, well, why can't we do the same with our level numbering? And I had a look at it, and it was interesting that I found that in our initial draft, we actually had a naming and numbering guide, but for whatever reason, it didn't get published into the initial specifications. So here we are 10 years on, and we're now putting it into the specifications. And what I put that down to is the level of maturity that is now evolving around data. So data as an asset is really what we're focusing on. And as you can see underneath the heading, we've actually done the research around the ISO 19650 standard, part 1. So we've adopted a simple BIM naming convention there. And that way it's consistent with what is happening in the holistically around the sector. Another thing that we've been doing is that, look, we found that it's easy enough to give people manuals, it's easy enough to give people spreadsheets, but one of the key things that we identified was that we've taken for granted that we understand the interconnectedness between these different tables. And so we're not trying to create a relational database structure, but there is relationships between different tables. So we've created this draft data model that we're happy to distribute. It will be updated with the latest versions. It's not been updated yet. And so this leads us into our first poll. Are you ready for the poll, Kelly? Hello.
It's there.
I hear you, Kelly.
Oh, sorry, I didn't have it on my screen. Yeah, so look, the first poll is, would this be of interest to you? Very simple, yes or no. We just want to get a sense of the interest of people. And I'll give you 20 seconds just to respond to that. Yeah, and we'd really like to get as many people responding as possible. We currently have about 43, we have 43 people logged into this chat, which is great. And it's we've created a personal best, Kelly, with the number of people on. So well done. Okay.
We just need some people to respond to this.
Yep. We'll leave it we'll leave it for a bit longer. Yeah, that's great.
Actually, we got 30 responses so far.
Yep, and look, just a little bit more about this. We've developed it in a Visio environment, and we know the power of Visio is that we can actually, if we create it correctly with the correct symbology, it can actually then be used to create a draft database environment. But the intention is to show the relationships between the different the different tables, and you can see things like there are common IDs like the building ID, the floor ID, the space ID, and what we see is that once we get those correctly populated, then it's pretty easy to link the other asset data to it. Okay, great. So look, the poll is there in your team's environment. Don't hesitate to populate it once.
Yeah, it'll sit in polls, so just click on polls if you've missed out. But we've got 33 responses so far, so thanks everyone.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, governance. There's a pretty big focus on governance, particularly data governance. And what do I mean by that? And so I want to cover 4 areas. One is around the handover process, and so here's another poll that Kelly will put up shortly. So essentially, we created this handover checklist, and the way that the intention of this is to use it as part of your assessment process, whether for capital works or a subdivision development application. This provides you with certainty about what will be delivered. And we're using it with all the projects that we run for our clients. And what we find is it's really useful, particularly from an accountability perspective. So the way that we use it is that we're asked to do data aggregation to comply with A-SPEC. So we ask people to complete this, and then they give us the drawings, and then we do a comparison between what's in the drawings and what's in the list. And then we can go back to them and say, you know, you mentioned bar stools and bar tables, but you haven't actually got any in the drawing. And that way it gives us an opportunity to chase it up rather than trying to work out and guess what we're meant to capture. And it's actually, you know, Gaby is leading our data capture team, and he does the QA validation on this. And, you know, we know that it's really making a difference, and highlights that where there are gaps in the data that's been provided to us. Our intention is that we'll create this as a fillable PDF, or essentially what I mean by that is that you won't have to print it off and mark it off with a pen. You'll just tick the box. And importantly, it's about also getting this countersigned. So you see that we have a column there for the asset owner and the developer. So whoever initiates the box, then the other is to sign it off that, yes, we agree that these are all the assets that are to be delivered, and particularly the data. And it's and we're encouraging and recommending to our clients that this is linked to issuing of a clearance or a sign-off or a statement of compliance. From a quality assurance perspective, we're looking at asset recording principles. We're looking at noting the deviation from the design from a recording perspective. So again, we're talking about what's there at practical completion. We're not talking about why has the design changed. There's other elements in place there. There's other processes in place that councils have to sign off that the variation passes. But this is about recording that variation. And what we're finding is that there's a gap between the inspection of what's there at practical completion to what was initially designed. And we want to close that gap to make sure that whoever is validating the data and verifying that what is in the data reflects what's in the ground, it's important that information is collected about that. There's a lot of emphasis now on projection of data, particularly with the GDA 2020 or the Australian Terrestrial Referencing Framework. From a surveyor's perspective, what we're asking them to do is to complete this certification form. But as well as completing this certification form for that, for the projection information, it also provides details about what the job is for, who it's for, what projection it's on, all of that sort of thing, so that it can be used as part of the confirmation of what has been provided. And importantly, it provides accountability for the project. From a little bit more about the asset recording principles, we've gone through every specification and we've identified the horizontal and vertical precision in terms of the data capture. So if it's, so as you can see, we've classified it from A through to G, both horizontal and vertical. And in each of the tables, you will see that there is an opportunity to view what the actual requirements are. So please become familiar with it. It's in the proposed documents at the moment, and you can go down to the asset table and see exactly what the requirements are. A few more things to talk about is that, you know, when we're looking at apportioning costs for data, and again, this is about trying to put into perspective what the cost is for the data. So we have design, construct, operate, typical, and you know, and there's some other categories in between, but typically that's the building life cycle, and that can be applied to any kind of asset. So what we're looking at is at what time, you know, what effort is put into data at different stages. So we have the design side, you can see, is a small part. The construction side is a bigger part, and then the operate is a much bigger side of that. And so in a simple graph, we're looking at it from a data perspective. So we can see in the design area, I remember when I was doing some sewer design during my time at Melbourne Water, the first thing was we looked at the location of it. So the graphics was important. And then we looked at the attribution side of it as we refined the design. By the time it got to the contractor needed to know exactly where it was going to be and the characteristics of that. From an owner-operator perspective, the graphics then forms a smaller part. So the key thing is the attribution. Therefore, the relevance of B-Spec and all of the other specifications is around making sure that the data that's in the different attributes is whole, complete, and accurate. Okay, so I'm about to hand over to Gaby. So as I said, Gaby is one of our business partners, and he's the principal lead in our joint venture partnership with Whereabouts, and our business is called Digital Hive. So Gaby will be talking from his perspective about some of the technical aspects to support our A-SPEC community. So on that note, I am now going to hand it over to Gaby. So fire away, Gaby.
Thank you, George. Just give me a sec. I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. Right. Okay. Kelly, can you see my screen? Okay. Right.
Surprisingly, yes, I can.
All right. So just a few things in terms of this first part. You know that the spec has changed or is changing, and one of the big things that's happening is that an area of works ID is being added to all of the attributes, to all the tables, so that new field needs to be added to everything that we're working with. And there's a few things. It's got to be consistently applied to all objects. Now, the clients that I work with, we've started using this, and people like it and want it, and they've got certain preferences. And so part of what I'm sharing here is how we've achieved making that happen for them. Now, you can do this in many ways. You can do it manually. You can do like a copy paste, a straightforward process. I call that a scary process. Or you can use the QGIS calculator if you're using QGIS, if you're using ArcInfo or any of the Esri products. There is a field calculator that you can use, and it works in a similar sort of way. Or you can achieve this by doing some scripting, and I'm going to show some of all of this just to make it interesting. So the first thing that you'd have to do is you may want to update the field structures. But I am saying perhaps just don't do it straight away. If you're starting from scratch, then I'd suggest download the sample data. It has been checked, it's all good, and empty those data sets and then use them as templates. That's probably the easiest and the quickest to get you going. Or you can go and do this if you need to work with existing data sets like we do, then there are some ways, and I'm going to be showing you some of those. All right, now at this point I'm going to bring out my cheat sheet. I often use Excel to cheat a little bit, and so what you see here is basically a list of all the A-SPEC tables that's necessary. And what you see over there, you can ignore this one, but what you see over there, the result is a SQL script that you would need to run in order to make this, to script it. And so all I've done is, this is a concatenation field, and if you look at it using Excel, the little wizard, you'll see that all I've done is I've got alter table, and then the name of the table, and then add the area of works as a varchar 100. All right, and that's standard SQL. SQL is simple English, really. So don't be scared of it. And so all I've done is if you also look at it like this, there's really 3 concatenate statements, and I'm just throwing them in here and dragging down, and I'm now copying that, and I'm just getting my SQL window open. And if I ran this in a SQL database, then that script will go and generate all those fields for me in one go. So the advantage I have of that is I'm not going to forget anything. I'm not going to make copy and paste mistakes. It's going to be it's a controlled, secure way in which I can make sure that I've applied all of those changes. Now, I'll continue about coming back to that in a short while. But the next part of this whole process is that I've now got to. So let's say I've got all this, I've done all of that. I have to now decide what my area of works identification is going to be. Now, if I query the area of works in the sample data that we've got over here, we'll see that there's the suburb name, stage number, and then there's a few other fields. And for me and for our clients, using some of those is really important in order to build this unique identifier for this for the area of works. And the important fields are the subdivision name, the stage number, and the construction date. Now, the question is there some way in which I can combine those quite easily to populate the area of works ID so that I can share that? And I'm going to jump over to the field calculator. So all I've done is I've highlighted the area extent, opened the field calculator. Now, if I go to update an existing field, I haven't run that script that I was showing you. And so you can see area of works is not here, so not available. But what I can do is I can just go create a new one and go area of works underscore ID. And Kelly, you need to watch me on my time, please. And in here, I'll find the existing fields, and I'll go, I want the suburb name, I want the stage number, and I want the construction date. And I've just double-clicked on all of them. And if you know this tool, then you'll know that it says the expression is invalid. And I know why it's invalid, because I didn't actually concatenate them. So the two little, we call them pipes. If you highlight that, you'll see that string concatenation. And all I have to do is I've got to make sure that I've got one of those in between each of these. And now you'll see it says rock rise 3B whatever. And I can run that and that will work. Okay. But George and I had a discussion about this, and he actually suggested we have a different way of doing it. And the different way, I've already built a formula that does all of those. And I'm just going to show you that little formula. So it's, again, it looks scary perhaps, but if you just think about it, it's the field names, all the field names that I'm talking about with the concatenation. And then there's this format the date, and it uses the construction date, and it gives it a pattern, and that pattern will work. Now I've done something weird with my formula, and now it seems to not be working. What is it that I've done? These live demos can be interesting. That's right. That's right. I just didn't delete this part. Right. And here you can see there's the concatenated part of, and I've duplicated that. I see what I've done. I've inserted it into the other formula, and that's why I've been crazy. And that's what I want. So I'm going to go and create that. And now if I query this area of works, you'll see the area of works ID is now there. All right. And obviously, there's other ways. I can now use, I've just copied that, and I can go and query things, and I can go and paste it into those fields if I wanted to. Sorry, I wanted to query this guy, and at the moment you can see the area of works is null, and I can just go and paste that if I've made the thing that field editable. It went so smooth yesterday, and today I'm making little mistakes. Okay, and there it is, and that is part of an easy way to do that. So I just want to take this out of the way. That's an easy way to start updating my all of my area works, but sometimes there's I'm at this stage I'm doing it one at a time, and I don't necessarily always want to do it one at a time. I want to actually run it for multiples. And I want to be able to run this particular script again and again and always get the same result. So how do I achieve that? So in QGIS, I have the ability to go and store variables, user expressions and variables. So if I go to the user expressions, you'll see that I've already stored one there under area of works. And I just double click on it, and there is a predefined one, which I can now go and apply every time. So the others that I had here, the recently updated list, that'll disappear as I work and as I do the things, as I carry on with my work. But this is also becomes a script which I give to the people that work for us, and I say to them, that's what we want. And so that enforces consistency, and ensures that we all do the same. Whenever we work, everything happens in the same sort of way, and that's standardization. Okay, right, Kelly, how much time have I got?
Plenty.
Okay, plenty. Good. The next part is that I can also make use of something called project variables. And I'm just going to look at my project properties. All right. And in my project properties, if I go to the variables section, you'll see that I've created one. So I could also just delete that quickly and just show you how it's created. It's very easy. So I go and create a project variable, and I'm going to call that area of works ID. And I'm going to paste the value that I've got in there, right? And if I now query this particular if I run the query for the sorry, I wanted to run that for the building space. Sorry, guys. So if I run that for the building space, so I update an existing one, area of works, and this time I'm not going to use. I know that it is there in the recent and in the variable in the user expressions, but I'm going to use it. I'm going to use that variable that I've just created. Double click on that, and you'll see it comes up with the same value. Click OK, and if I now query any of these, that area of works would have been updated. Okay, but what's nice about the using those is that I can also go and set it up in such a way that my forms, when I capture new ones, automatically goes and populates that by default. And I'll use the expression editor again. I'll go to variables and I'll say, use that particular variable whenever you're capturing a new form based on this. Okay. And so if I go and capture, I'll just do a rough capture. I'm not going to actually save this because I'll mess up my data. But if you look at this blank form and I scroll to the bottom, there it is already populated. And so every time I capture something new, that value, it'll now know that value needs to be assigned or applied by default to any new feature objects that I'm capturing. And that way, it just ensures, again, that we have consistency and reliability. And a big thing for me is I don't want the users to make mistakes, and so I want to give them tools with which they can easily go and give me that consistency that I'm looking for. The final thing I wanted to do is actually take that whole concept another step further, and to talk about that, just to give you some background about what I'm about to do is, if you go and look at the building space, if I go and look at the attributes there, you'll see that I've got all these records. I've got a building ID, I've got a floor ID, and I've got a space ID. And if I go and look at any of the others, like the command lines, and go here, and again, I've got a build ID, a floor ID, space ID. So these identifiers are repeated throughout a lot of the A-SPEC tables. And I'm looking for a way of, if you were looking for a way to include or to automatically calculate within which area of works I am, within which building floor plan I am, within which footprint I am, that particular new feature is, or a line, etc. And I can populate all of these tables automatically in one go. It also means that it gives me a much bigger level of assurance that my data is going to be correct. And I've got another little update that I've created over here. Again, it's the same kind of thing, that's just expanded a little bit. So I've got the child and I've got the parent. The parent is always the table from where I want to populate or gather the identifier. And we refer to that as the primary key, foreign key. So this will be the primary key of that table, and this will be the foreign key inside this table. And so what I've got here is just an update script, again, that'll create the updates, but that update is based on the spatial relationship. And you'll see, if you know anything about SQL, spatial SQL, you'll see that there's an ST contains, and so it says where. So select the building ID from the building footprint where ST contains the geometry of the building footprint, where, in other words, where the sign is inside that particular building footprint. And so per floor and per building space, that same principle is now going to be applied. And so all it is I've got the child field, the parent field, and then that script. And again, it's just a concatenate statement. It's a little bit more complex this time. And I did say to George, I'll happily make this available to people if they're interested in it. But what I can do with this is copy that entire statement, and it will now update if I run that on. I'm just going to paste it in here. Just so, yep.
Gaby, can people get access to these scripts?
That's what I'm saying. Is I'll make it available.
Right.
Or however we're going to do it. Happy to share this so that people can run them and use them. But just to finish that off, so what this particular script will do, it'll go and update all those foreign keys and all the objects within the polygons. The important thing would be make sure that you've got the parent object ID populated so that it has something that it can drag, and that all your data capture is complete, and all those spatial relationships will be accurate. Then run the script and you're done. And that's all I had for you today. So over to you for questions. I don't know how quick or slow I was, how much time I've got. But any questions?
You've still got 10 minutes, Gabby, so that's okay. So questions are most welcome at this stage. Yep, but also, because George finished early, but we can also give people 10 minutes back on their day as well. But if you are interested in getting a copy of Gabby's scripts, can you please just pop your name in the chat and I'll make sure that that goes out to you. And yes, the recordings will all be available after the series is finished.
Okay. Yeah, if there's any questions about these, I'm happy to take them now. Or comments, if you think I'm daft to use Excel in this sort of way. No? Okay.
Okay, great. So that means you were concise, Gabby, so well done.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for that presentation. I wanted to now hand over to Anthony from the City of Gosford. Is that correct? Yeah, Gosnells, close. Anthony Procino, is that pronounced correctly, Anthony?
That's right, Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, I can. He's going to talk about why B-Spec, I think. Is that correct?
It's actually going to be more about the city's journey in the last 2.5 years.
Right.
So it's more generic in terms of like A-SPEC as a whole, but I will touch on B-Spec and how we're progressing with that.
And Anthony, what's your role at the City of Gosnells?
So I'm the coordinator of assets and spatial services. So I've got 24 years experience in spatial, 14 years here at Gosnells, and the last 2.5 years has been in the asset space. So I'm relatively new to assets, but I see a synergy between the two disciplines, and it's that'll be covered in my story. And I think it's probably a good experience to get a lot of stakeholders involved and map out how you want this to look, because ultimately it does involve a lot of different players, and if you're not on the same page, you're not going to have success. So, and success looks different for many people, but you got better chance when you involve everybody, find out what they want out of the process and build it together and get people on board. You're always still going to have challenges, even if you do that as best you can, but it increases your chance of success. So I'm just going to run through our journey for the last 2.5 years, because that's the period of time that I've been in the asset space and also involved in A-SPEC. So I will share my screen and hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, are we all good?
All good, thank you.
All right, okay. So I think the City of Gosnells has been a member for a long period of time. I've put down 2012, but it might have been longer than that. And I've sort of split up what was happening before and after I sort of came into the picture. So prior to 2021, data submissions were internally or externally emailed just between staff members. There was no tracking of data receipt or processing or validation within the corporate systems. So, you know, you might have a case of someone in subdivisions getting data to just get emailed to a person because they don't know what it is. Here, these some files, I don't know what they are. And so we sort of didn't have that tracking. There wasn't really a clear and consistent validation process according to the specification. So we're sort of not communicating to the data providers a consistent message of what we would want, and trying to not to be a custom job. So I guess the benefit of having a specification is it's clear to data providers. We as the city aren't determining what we want, it's the spec has done that. That's the advantage of having a specification. So the messaging was probably we're just taking what we were given and going, oh, she'll be right. Also data submissions in their entirety were not available to staff in the city spatial system. It was bits and pieces, but not the entire specification. And data submissions were, and I guess that ties into the last point where A-SPEC was solely seen to recognise assets. So it was seen as an asset management function. So anything that wasn't recognised as an asset, like our city doesn't recognise trees or turfed area, things like that, that data was not shared and not available. So we didn't get the full value of the data. So once I kind of came in, as I said, I've had a lot of experience in the spatial industry and process mapping. And one of the first things I sort of thought would be advantageous is to get the process within the corporate system. So having it trackable, captured and trackable in our corporate records, property and spatial systems. And that's this step here is what I mean about mapping it out. So you need to have a very clear understanding of what your systems can and can't do. So you'll be meeting with your records people, your spatial people, obviously your asset custodians, and get some end users in there and start mapping it out and understanding what your capabilities of your corporate systems is. Everyone's got different corporate systems, and so you need to get the people that know those systems best to get involved and understand how you can map it out. We here at the City of Gosnells, we use a spatial ETL software called FME. Most of your spatial people would have heard of this software. I'm probably stepping on George's toe and Gaby's toes a little bit here because I know they offer a product that does validation. But we utilise this software and the purpose of this software is to, we've built it so that you can get those raw GIS files, do some basic validation and push it to SQL tables, which makes it available in our spatial system. And also, so once it's available in our spatial system, it's available to everyone. So you're opening up that data portal to everybody, not just a handful of people. The validation process involves communication with all stakeholders, so spatial asset officers, project managers and data providers. So it could be as simple as, hey, surveyor ABC, just letting you know data is compliant and all's good. People respond to that, knowing that they've received that, or communicating some data amendments or changes. We found that in the early days, because we were getting different type of submissions or different some fields filled in and some not. The initial probably 6 months was, oh, we didn't know we had to provide that. So once that became an understanding, and as I said, our approach was always point to the specification, as per the specification, that constant message. And that's, I think that was appreciated by the data providers and all parties involved. So now data submissions are available in their entirety on the city spatial system. And A-SPEC is now not just seen as an asset management function, it is now seen as a corporate service to the whole city. So my team actually sits in information services. It doesn't sit in assets, or infrastructure. like most councils. So we see this as a corporate service. Some of the other uses that we've have seen in the last 2.5 years, having it on our spatial system, is ability to locate services. So you might have like a crew out there about to dig something up, and they can see where the line to the drinking fountain is. That's easily consumed on our GIS now. Before it was maybe somewhere in someone's files, maybe not in the record system, maybe not in the. So having that data front and centre, you're surprised at how many uses come about. Operational information and analysis. It could be something as simple as, look, Anthony, I've been asked how much metres of mulch has the city taken on the last year. We don't recognise mulch as an asset, but we can go to the data and go polygons that equal mulch in the year, this year, from this date range. Roughly, this is how much areas of mulch, and we can extrapolate that. Corporate statistics. One example we had recently, and it filtered. It went from the CEO's office down to planning, down to tree services, and the question was, how many trees have been donated to the city in the last year? So how many trees through subdivisional works has the city inherited and now have to look after? And we were able to quickly go to A-SPEC and go trees, exclude existing, because sometimes there's existing in the survey. How many new trees from A-SPEC in this date range? Boom. We pushed that out. So we're seeing quite a few different uses. All right, so we can see my next slide. Now? Yeah. Okay. Just call out if anything's not working right. So yeah, so some of the benefits I've kind of already touched on, so I'll skim past these ones. So use of corporate systems, I can't emphasise that enough. Once you have a system process in your systems, it's a much more efficient way of tracking or processing data. There's a tracking system, and also the big advantage is if you map out your process and you have it in the systems, the process and the data access is available to various roles and users. So, the job people follow the role. So if people are on leave, the people take over that role, the role follows the person. So the data processing, having clear and consistent process, communication to all stakeholders. And we've seen that we've got a consistent data outcome. So the data is becoming more consistent and that brings better value. Outcomes, we've seen, data integrity, confidence. The more users, there's more ownership of data. When people start using data as part of their process, they'll be the first ones that tell you, hey, you've missed this, you've missed something here. I was out there the other day and I can't see this, why? And that creates ownership, and that facilitates data integrity. From an assets point of view, we see it as a good trigger for asset creation. So A-SPEC forms that trigger. It is very handy in ground truthing in the asset space. One of the things going through your asset register, the hardest thing to do, if you don't have ground truthing, then you don't know whether that exists or not. We had many examples 2.5 years ago where things were out on the site but weren't in the register, or things were in the register but since been disposed. So, and that obviously leads into auditing time. When you have assets, you'll get a lot of questions on when was the last time you checked this asset. You can use A-SPEC as a base to build your auditing process, your checking mechanism. And we've done that very well in the park space. So we actually have field apps that uses A-SPEC as a base, and we run through at least once a year checking all our park assets, and that fulfills an auditing obligation. Statistics since 2021. Reason why I can publish statistics since then is this is when we had data in a spatial SQL environment. And once it's in an environment like that, you can run so many stats in many different ways. So we processed 56 D-SPEC, 32 O-SPEC, and 52 A-SPEC. I've put that number of objects next to them just to give you an idea of how data intensive some of those specs are. So you can kind of see O-SPEC is quite intensive compared to D-SPEC, and A-SPEC is quite intensive as well. So many layers, many lines, dots and regions. Out of those submissions, 92 are from subdivisional development, and 48 are from city projects. Am I all good? Everyone okay?
Yes,
Yep,
all good,
yep,
thank
that's
you.
great.
All good? I wasn't sure whether we're still there or not.
Yeah, everyone's still here.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Please,
And
everyone,
Anthony-
interrupt should you have questions.
Anthony, there's a question from Renier.
Yeah.
Well, he's got his hand up for a question.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once here, but it's not working. Yeah, fire away if you got a question.
Sorry, that was accidental, guys, so don't worry about it.
Okay, no worries. So a majority of the submissions come from the subdivision space, but I'll kind of expand on that in the next slide, why that is the case. Okay, so it is the B-Spec forum, and I guess I should say something about B-Spec. So I've got 0 submissions since 2021, and the question why. Here at the city, it kind of fell between the cracks. So when I came on board in the asset space, I was like, what's our obligation in the B-Spec space? I did look at some historical data that I found on a file server, and we had a submission from 2016, which was the community centre, and that was, and we put it in a test environment just to become familiar with it, and that's where the screenshot that George used earlier in his presentation came from, because once we put the data in our test environment and put it in our spatial, we found that it was quite unique in the sense that for multi-level buildings, having that level as a code was really important and would automate the process of having all the data in the different levels automatically aligned. So we have that one submission in our test environment. What has happened here? So I guess I started a conversation, and it was like, you know, we don't need to have something so complicated for toilets, and you know, that was, I guess, the starting point. And the question was, well, when would the city want to have B-Spec? So this is where stakeholder engagement became really important, and George was part of it. He came and visited us in February, so that was really good. And we just, I guess, what came out of that engagement was some clearer guidelines on when the city would want B-Spec, and so our data policy had recently been updated for new builds with one or more of the following characteristics, so multi-level buildings with an elevator, buildings with HVAC systems or aquatic centres. So the city has some probably planned works, probably in 3 years' time, for a new operations centre, and we also have plans for a new aquatic centre. So, you know, that'll be interesting how that goes when the time comes, but that's still in the planning stage. So it was good to get that clear guidance. And I'll move on to the next slide, because the challenge still remains with B-Spec, because although we've got clear guidelines on what the city would like, we haven't received any, and we won't for some time. I guess the big challenges out of the engagement was it's the most complex specification to deliver. I think that's the feedback from surveyors that I've spoke to, from other stakeholders.
Sorry, and I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we know why it's complex?
I think it probably that's a question probably best answered by some of the other people that are involved. But what I can sort of see is speaking. I guess I don't want to speak on behalf of surveyors, but I guess the feedback that I've got was it is quite intensive, and it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like a lot of it is sort of mashing together some CAD, and it's hard to sort of like there's parts of that spec that you can't see, you know, so you're going to have to take it from a design file. You can't see what's in a roof, where the HVAC is. So I guess that adds to the complexity. And because local government, in terms of buildings, they're very infrequent. We don't acquire or build them, or don't acquire them at all. None of them get donated to us, and we don't build very many of them. And they take 2 to 3 years, maybe longer to build. And so we don't get a lot of practice at receiving them. One thing that's definitely come out is information that is filtering through is architects are just not familiar with B-Spec and spatial formats, and typically provided in CAD format, even when B-Spec is requested in the tender specification. So we had some missed opportunities because we have built a building in the last 2 years, and we did. The understanding was B-Spec was requested, but we never got it. And I guess it was one of the triggers to have the conversation. So that's the journey for B-Spec for us. But areas of improvement in general for A-SPEC, we have a data gap. So we get A-SPEC for all subdivisions, but we are not capturing A-SPEC for all our capital works. So we get some park projects, but we miss out on drainage, roads and paths. So it's a data gap that we want to address. The discussion of resources comes in, whether it gets outsourced, all those type of things, whether it's needed. I think it's needed, you know. I think the city requires it. So that's a gap that we're sort of working on, and how do we address that? Drainage is one of the complex data sets to maintain. Being underground, been around for a long time, so we're having discussions about using some new resources, whether it's people resources or cameras and all sorts of gadgets to check drainage and capture drainage. So we're in discussions with our engineering teams to capture that in B-Spec, so we can put it into our corporate system. And I think in general, just creating further awareness and use of A-SPEC data. Just surprised how far it can go. It's definitely more than an asset management tool. We've seen definitely some operational and strategic uses. And I just think it's a good base to facilitate a process to periodically ground truth, inspect and audit assets. We've done some recent auditing of 6 of our asset classes in this year, so just been through the ringer, and we found that we had some positive feedback that we were using some kind of data process and workflow that was able to back up what we had in our register. So I thought that was pretty important. Okay, that's it.
Thanks,
Great.
Anthony. I've got a question for you,
Cool.
mainly because I know a bit more about what went on.
Yeah.
You've probably undersold the effort that was needed from your part to have 2 directors and managers agree on B-Spec. Now, there's a lot of other organisations here that may be going through the same thing with any of the specs. What was there something in particular that had them shift their position from not really interested to yes, we have to?
I think there's always something that happens in the background, and I think my understanding was that we had recently had some failed HVACs in our buildings, and when there was an effort to find some old drawings to be able to quote the works, it couldn't be found. So I think those conversations probably triggered a thing of, well, you know, if we want to be able to, it's future proofing the business. I think you need future insight. It's not the now, always the now. This data is going to be useful for when you really need it. And I think that's the lesson. You need to have that future insight to be able to go, it's not just the now thing, it's a later on. So I think that was probably one of the triggers.
So if I was to put words into your mouth, you built the fear of missing out.
I think the first step is showcasing what the data looks like. So we were lucky to have that 2016 example. And so having that visible and showing stakeholders what the data looks like and what it can do, I think it opens their eyes. I mean, it could be something as simple as, you'd be surprised, I mean, buildings maintenance, it's usually like, oh, the lights are starting to all go out. How many lights do I have? And it literally is one person going around counting lights. Well, if you have good B-Spec, no one's counting lights. The data's there. And the same with HVAC. If you need to be able to quote, you know, or show data to vendors that are going to quote for that, it makes your job easier. So, yeah, I guess it's hard to look at the future, you know, because everyone's caught up in the present. But I think the important thing is trying to just get people to understand what the data looks like and what are some of the benefits.
Okay, great. So we've got a couple of comments that people have made. So Matthew Mataboni, as always, you're a good contributor to these forums. You made a really valid point about understanding what needs to be captured, just working off the design drawings. This is something that we've also identified because of the kind of data capture work that our team does. Do you think that those checklists or the checklist that we showed earlier would contribute to making that easier?
It's a good, I was thinking about it when you were presenting, so it's still fresh in my mind. I mean, I think the thing that I've kind of learned through in this whole process is, through the validation process, no one wants something that's quite onerous or seeming like it's an extra thing to do. I think there would be some benefit to it, but my only concern is it's another thing to do. It's another, it's someone who's going to do it, who's going to pass it around, who's going to, our approach here at Gosnells has been get the project managers part of the process. So they weren't before. So how they're part of the process is, once the data is in the GIS, they can touch and feel it. where before they didn't know what it was. So they need to look at that and go. So we might get an example where we go, hey Anthony or hey team, there's a rain garden missing. There should be a rain garden here. Data doesn't show rain garden. And so as a collective, we compile that those information and we communicate that to the developer or the surveyor, and they will go and pick it up before we close it out. So we kind of have some internal steps that sort of handle that already. And also I think, especially with capital works stuff, some of the engagement we've done in terms of with project managers is because it's a capital job, they're the one procuring the survey. They need to have an understanding of what the surveyor needs to do their job. So we've been a bit of a conduit of, you know, obviously if they can see data, they can understand what information. It could be like quantities, costs, things like that. So just getting together with project managers going, hey, instead of going backwards and forwards, this is what the spec requires. And now as part of that, we sometimes will, when we contract the work out, we make it part of the specification that they've got to provide the billing of quantities and things like that. So the project manager doesn't have to do it. But yeah, getting back onto just some checks and balances, I think it's just important to get people involved, and if they become data custodians and use it and own it, they're vested in it. They want the data to be right. That's a big point that I would make.
Okay, just on that, not that I want to cut you off, but Renier has had his hand up for some time. Are people getting feedback from me talking? Oh, that's okay.
It's got something to do with Anthony's mic. I just muted Anthony and it fixed it.
Thank you. Okay.
So
no problem. So Renier, thanks for your patience. What's your question?
Not a problem at all. I actually have a few questions, 3 actually. So
Fire
Anthony, or open to the community. So what has been, given the buildings are such a long-lived asset, I'm going to use that word specifically, and we don't often get new acquired buildings, has anyone sort of gone through the exercise or their experience of converting existing assets to the full B-Spec format? You know, again, around things like, you know, the polygon lines, things you can't see in the roof, as you mentioned, Anthony. What has been your experience from, you know, basing that off, you know, all drawings or inherent asset data or anything like that? That's my first one.
Yeah, good question. The simple answer is no. I did have an appetite to capture a missed opportunity of a building that was a $7 million building 2 or 3 years ago. There probably isn't an appetite to retrospectively capture the data, unfortunately. I think some of the concerns from the city is resourcing. And so, but that's probably one that I sort of tinkered with, you know, probably getting the CAD drawings and trying to retrospectively do a pickup, but I don't know what that really looks like, and I don't know whether there's appetite for that.
Okay, great. Next, I'm mindful that we've caught up with our time, but I think it's great to have this conversation going. So what's your next question, Renier?
That was just around, so I'll condense it down to the 2. How do you validate your own internal team data inputs? You know, are you in the assets area? Sorry, you're actually sitting separate to the assets area. Are you inputting and validating the data yourself from what teams provide you? Are they doing an input, you're reviewing and validating it and then commissioning it accordingly?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, it's not there.
Indeed.
Yeah, okay, cool. So our workflow, I think we got some people on that not muted. So our workflow's pretty well mapped out. So there's some key steps. So the spatial team receive raw data requests through our record system. Goes into a spatial inbox. They load the data into the FME validator, and the spatial role focuses on the spatial protocol. So is it the right projection? Is it the right table structure? Is it, are the codes right? So we use Gaby's code list API to automate that. So we want to remove any manual checking of data. So if you've got a spatial analyst resource, that's where you can save a lot of time. So that's what spatial do. Then they push it to the spatial system. It's then available for all staff to view. The asset team then look, and the project manager of that submission. And it could be, if it's a subdivision job, then the subdivision team get involved, and they will look over the data in our spatial system, and they will check the asset side of things. You know, the checks aren't extremely in detail, so no one's checking drainage invert levels. It's more about, is the pit right? Is the rain garden there? Is it in fact, you know, a 300 diameter concrete pipe? And the way we show the data in our spatial is to have labels to make sure that it's easy to consume, so no one has to really click on anything. You'll see what type of pit it is without clicking on it. You'll see what diameter or material the pipe is without clicking on it. So it's very visually easy to consume. And they'll do those surface level checks, and if everything's all right, they'll go to spatial team, this is good, ready to make this compliant, and then we send the message out to the all stakeholders saying this is done, this is compliant, we can close this one out. Or any feedback is collated into you know, sort of a consistent email to the data providers, and they respond back with the amendment, and then it goes through the same sort of process. But obviously it doesn't go the full circle. It's usually we get the amendments, put it in the spatial system, and that closes it out. So there's a few different teams looking at the data, a few different teams that have an opportunity to comment on the data, instead of having it to be one person's role or one team's role. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rainier. Anything else from you?
That is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, Anthony, there's a question from City of Melville, which I'll get you to respond to in the chat if that's okay. But Luke Coxon posed a question, and that's to the councils here. I have an answer there for you, Luke, but I'm interested to find out from other councils here. Have any representatives from councils here rejected a submission from a contractor for not aligning to A-SPEC? Anthony, has your council been in that position?
Sorry, George, I missed that.
You rejected submissions for not aligning to A-SPEC.
I think reject is a harsh word. We run through a data amendment process. So if something's missing, we ask for it to be corrected. I think it's important to have a common sense approach. So if something is a little bit out, like something minor, we will, you know, take that on board and correct it. But if something's missing or incorrect, yeah, we send it back. And if it's something that's significant, which doesn't tend to happen a lot anymore, because I think with good communication,
Yep.
the data quality just improves, and I think data providers really appreciate it because they're doing a job with many different clients, and so if you make your messaging very clear, they appreciate that, and it's very rare. But if something's significant, I'd ring up a surveyor or a data provider and say, hey, haven't had this issue before. You know, one example has been, you know, property connections for drainage, and we just needed to clear up some messaging on that, and that was just phone call and email directly with data providers, and they were like, yep, cool, no worries. We didn't really do that like that before, and it wasn't my preference. It's the specification. So sometimes you need to just clarify that with the data providers, and they appreciate that.
Okay.
So
Yeah, thanks for that. So to paraphrase, if there's something that's really critical, you'll ask them to resubmit, but otherwise you'll use a common sense approach so that if it's something that you can adjust, you will, but you'll let them know so that they can deal with it next time.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've left out in my presentation that I think was really involved a few phone calls when I sort of took over in 2021 was photos. I just think photos are a very powerful tool, and we were not receiving photos. So when we started asking for photos, the initial response from data providers was, we've never done photos. Why do you want photos now? And so I guess where the common sense came in, we kind of made it, we kind of went, well, we don't want, if there's a submission with 20 site entry pits and they all look the same, we don't need 20 individual photos for site entry pits. Just give us one photo that's called SEP and tag that to 20 pits. And although that might sound silly, we've got some custom looking grates and all sorts of different looking infrastructure, grain gardens, and the photo just helps immensely. I think in one of my slides I had a picture of it was a ceramic casted water play feature in a playground, and it was worth $15,000, and without a photo it wouldn't have been clear what this was. It was actually a surprise to everyone in the city that we had something like that, but I think photos was a big one. And once I had a few phone calls with the data providers, they were on board. They were, yeah, cool, we can understand why you want photos. And so yeah, I just think good communication and just being clear on that. And once again, the photos wasn't something that City of Gosnells required, or that was their decision. That was the spec. The spec says where applicable. Obviously, if it's underground, you can't, but where applicable, a photo, please provide a photo. So, yeah.
Thanks, Anthony. I think we'll that was a great session, great conversation you created out of presenting that. And you know, when you're running these things for the first time, you never really know what to expect, but hopefully all the other presenters will generate the same level of conversation. Back to you, Kelly.
Thanks, George. Anthony, if you could just keep an eye on the chat, and perhaps you can answer some of the other questions that have come through, or just see the comments as well. It has been really good to get that conversation going. Our next speaker is Gaby again, who is going to talk about why he loves B-Spec. So, Gab, if that's not your title, then maybe next time you'll send it through before the event. Anyway, so thank you, Gabby, for coming back on and talking to us about B-Spec, and I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. I'm just sharing my screen real quick. And there and allow. Okay. This discussion is a little bit about some of our experiences. We've helped some people capturing B-Spec data over the last bit, and this is just reflecting on some of the experiences that we've had, and this is very specifically looking at data that we knew came from a Revit environment, or there was Revit somewhere in the piece, and so this is just a bit of a reflection on what we have over there. Okay, so first of all, the projects that we were involved in there's really two types. The one was updating facilities management and asset management data, and the other was actually capturing B-Spec off data that was provided. What was interesting is that we had to extract similar types of information, and we know that information mostly comes out of Revit models. So the sources that was used as Revit, and basically this proved to be quite interesting for us. So when you look at what BIM is all about and what people say, what people talk about BIM, I'll just go through that very quickly. BIM workflows are supposed to enable effective management of project information. So, if you take that on board, you'd expect that if somebody has worked with BIM, that you'll get some great advantages if you have that data, if you get access to the data. And then each step in the workflow defines the input and output so that the data can be organized, accurate, and accessible to all stakeholders. So that's another statement they make, and that's, love that statement. And then centralized information management can improve data integrity, reduce errors, and support information decision-making throughout the project lifecycle. And then I've added also, they say, if it's easy to create loads of complex drawings, that doesn't mean that you should. It's just a comment I'm making. From one of our projects, we received 538 PDFs. 40 of those were multi-page. 49 DWGs and 62 DXFs. The data was generated from two different models on this particular one. And most of the drawings had different layer structures, different naming conventions, and they were auto-generated and they were not spatially referenced. And that just brings me back, and it was a bit of a frustration for us because we knew where the data came from. It's this Revit model that's supposed to give us all this nice stuff, and yet what we got was something really, really difficult. Now, if you can imagine 538 PDFs, and you've got to go and look for particular little bits and pieces of information out of those to capture a B-Spec asset. So with Revit, it's really quick and easy to create multiple complex drawings like the one I've got on the screen, and usually those are good for construction. But if you have a drawing that's good for construction, like I've got on the screen over there, it's not necessarily good for as constructed data. If you look at this, in the middle is the floor plan, or a part of the floor plan of a kitchen, and then there's all these bits and pieces around it, which are really nice detail for the people who are going to develop or put that kitchen in place. And that kitchen is part of a bigger project. This was presented to us now for those of you who understand B-Spec. one of the things in there is one of the attributes for all your B-Spec data is what's the source, and we were given this as combination 1. So it's a combination of field work and design as constructed data. And this is what was given to us as the design as constructed data. And I have questions about that. So I've just repeated myself there. So people use something in Revit called a family. So Revit families they're nice to have, because what it is that you get a provider, a data provider, or somebody who provides, say, Windows. They build a little a data family, and that's given to the Revit developer, and the Revit developer takes that family and inserts it into the Revit model. And then you can do all sorts of funny things. You can extract, you can calculate how many of those Revit families or how many of that particular window is in the model, and you can get all sorts of details about that. It requires 25 screws to put together. It has these attributes, etc. The problem is that a lot of the providers of these elements will all have their own. They'll all have their own standards. They use their own terminology. They have their own naming conventions. And when that data gets extracted to CAD, so the Revit operator has a powerful tool in Revit. You can just generate the drawing. So you have your 3D model, and that's great and easy. And then you just cut the model up into little bits, and you zoom in, and you set up a set of drawings that just generate DWGs for you, and it can regenerate drawing after drawing. And that's why we ended up with over 500 drawings to work with. Okay, I'm told that I haven't got a lot of time, so I'm going to cut to a few other things. In Australia, there's a standard for layer names and for using layer name conventions. And one of the things I'm saying is, let's use that standard. There's a better approach. Standardize. Don't reuse the drawings that's issued for construction. Generate as constructed specific outputs. So so if something has been generated for as constructed, that giving it to somebody and marking it up to somebody, and you now have to capture the data off, it becomes really, really hard. I want to get to my sorry, there's a oh, okay. All of a sudden, I'm all stressed, George, because you've told me I haven't got a lot of time.
Don't stress, Gaby. Just go on.
All good. I'm just going to show you this. So here is one of the drawings that we were given, and if I zoom in, you'll see all these little red markups. So that's the as constructed drawing. But then there's attribution of all the variations that occurred in all these little red markups. And you know what, that's good. I think it's important that things are marked up. The problem is that people don't update the model. So these markups don't get back to the model. And then when the drawings are recreated, that's lost. And if you look at BIM, it's supposed to be a methodology that provides you complete life cycle. But what it means is that you've got to get back to the single source of truth. And what I'm saying is, manage the single source of truth. Make sure that your single source of truth is the model or the DWG, whichever it is, and then stick to that. And if any variations occur, update that. Okay, and then for the longer term, make sure that you provide proper unique identification. So don't just generate and not use the generated unique identification throughout the future drawings that is generated. Make sure that when you generate the unique identifiers, they stay the same throughout the life cycle of the project. And there's a way in which you can do that. Not everybody does that. Then push those unique identifiers out to every CAD drawing that you create. Make sure that it's there and that it's clearly visible. And then if you generate schedules, which you have to do, then also add the unique identifiers to the schedules. Something that we provide is called a shared parameter file. And what we suggest to people is that you implement the shared parameter files, because what that is, it's really forcing all those custom families into a B-Spec specific environment. So within Revit, we update the attribution with B-Spec coding and B-Spec field names and etc. And then we have a tool, a way in which we can connect that to a database. So you have your model, you maintain that, connect it to a database, and make sure that that any changes in the database or in the model is fed back to the database. Right. My last thing is I wanted to quickly push the GDV Hub, because this is better for when you do your data validation. You need a place where you can go and eliminate the toing and froing between the developer and council. And so if you've gone through that process of the families and the shared parameter files, it feeds into the GDV Hub, and it really solves a lot of your problems for you. I am pushed for time. I wish I could finish this, but we'll leave it at that. I'll just leave that on the screen for a minute, and over to you, George.
Thanks, Gaby.
That was a flash.
It was a flash. I'm sorry that we have to push you through. It was a good flash, though. And if anybody wants to follow Gaby up on some of those points, let me know and I'll hook you up. So I'm going to hand back to George now to, I guess, wrap up the today's forum. So thanks all for coming, and George, over to you.
Thanks, Kelly. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Gaby, that was really good, and it looks like you could probably create that into one of your tech tips for next time, because there was a lot of valuable information there, particularly around the Revit stuff and particularly around your experience and our team's experience in moving between CAD and Revit. And I know that there's a few people here that'd be particularly interested in it. And probably Luke Coxon from Atlas would be pretty keen to have a conversation with you about that as well. I'm presupposing that, but anyhow, so the wrap up. Okay, so 4th of September is a relevant date. What that means is that all of the documents that are currently in the proposed section will be moved to the normal download area. So what do I mean by that? When you get your login, you'll come to this page. So as you can see that there's a specifications section there, and you click here to download the A-SPEC documents. That's where the current versions of the specifications published in 2019 and all the related data can be found. You can only access that through a login. If you're looking for the proposed data, you can do it in a couple of ways. You can go through the A-SPEC online menu clip, or put proposed changes in the search box, work your way through to this section. So in this section, it outlines all of the proposed versions that will become valid from the 4th of September. Now, in the background, we're doing our final run through of these documents, and they will move from the current date of 24th of April to the date of 4th of September. If there are any major changes that we identify that are going to impact the use of the specifications, we'll notify you. but so far, we're quite confident that what is in these proposed sections is what will exist. And so this is on the same page. This is really important. So we're saying now that we're bundling all of these documents up to be release A-SPEC version 5. So everything related to A-SPEC version 5 is shown in this box. This will be particularly important because as we go on, we'll talk about A-SPEC version 6, A-SPEC version 7, and so on, and we will have the documents associated with that particular A-SPEC release. Just below that is where you can access the different documents. Now you can see that there is a document there. You can download a document of the consolidated changes. And some of the other work that we're doing in the background is with the spreadsheets of each of the documents. One of our work colleagues, Michael, is doing the changes to the spreadsheets and listing where the changes are. So a different way of showing it so that you can be clear about what impact has been had on which table in which spec. Also have a look at downloading the CSV document, which is the certification form, and the handover checklist. So we've got it there in a Word document and a PDF document. So there's a number of documents there that you don't need a login to access. They're freely available. Anything dealing with intellectual property involved with the specs from D-Spec down will need a login. New specification, A-SPEC. So we're looking at how we can include other asset classes that won't necessarily fit into a particular existing specification. So we're looking at EV charging stations, we're looking at combustible liquid tanks, we're looking at solar farms, and we're looking at how we can capture data about that. Now, the intention of A-SPEC, I've got a little pun here. My wife said, don't make any jokes because I'm the only one that laughs at them. So I'm not going to have any jokes, but, you know, what can you expect with A-SPEC? Well, you know, there's going to be the X-files, of course. And so what we'll be looking at is how we can make this a complementary specification. So what we mean by that is that if you currently subscribe to the specifications, we're going to be looking at developing A-SPEC so that things that don't naturally fit into the specs are provided and there will be no cost to that, to access that. The next forum's D-Spec, which is next week. So we'll have two community presentations, one from Shane Sewell from Miller & Merrigan and another one from John Cleverton from Marshall in Melbourne. And, you know, Shane's company, Miller & Merrigan, were probably the first company that actually provided compliant D-Spec data. So we're talking back in 2004, 2005. So that's when the specs were first published with D-Spec. So essentially, next year we'll be celebrating 20th anniversary of A-SPEC and also 20th anniversary of dealing with Miller & Merrigan. So looking forward to see what Shane's observations have been around that. John Cleverton, working with Marshall, previously known as Watson's, has also had a long history with the specs and is a regular contributor, and maybe he'll make some veggie and fruit puns, who knows, but he's always great to have a chat with. Just to give you an idea, as you can see, this is our 4th year and we've progressively increased the number of attendees over time, which is really pleasing. So 2023, we've already increased the number of attendees for B-Spec. It's really pleasing, our new format. We hope you enjoy that. Kelly, if you want to get the poll up so that people don't have to wait till the very end to do that. We just want to get your feedback about the sessions that we've had. We really appreciate that. And that will be in your Teams environment. So I'll be around for a few more minutes, probably until about quarter past 12. I want to acknowledge everybody for taking the time, setting aside the time. And I noticed that we started this session with 41 people. We moved to 44. Now we have 40 still online. It indicates to me that what we provided was of interest to everybody there. Thank you very much for your contribution, for your participation in the community. We are always interested in your feedback. We don't shy away from areas that, the good is easy to talk about. The bad, people are a bit shy about it. The ugly, people don't talk about it. We're not concerned. Good, bad, the ugly. It's a community. It's about sharing experiences. If we don't know about something, we can't deal with it, can't address it. And so on the last note that I want to say is that if we have previously promised to be in contact with you and we haven't, please do not hesitate to contact me directly or put in or send an email to our info@gisa email. For whatever reason, we will make sure that we follow up on your interest with any part of A-SPEC or what we present to you. So thanks again for your participation. Thank you, Anthony and Gabby, for the work that you put into your presentations. And I look forward to seeing everybody who has registered for D-Spec to come to D-Spec. If you haven't registered, then it's not too late. And of course, Kelly, thank you as always.
No worries.
You're unstoppable. So,
but also, please, before you jump off, just go into the polls and quickly fill out those polls. That would be great.
Yep. Thanks again.